That means the fuel retailing prices in India, they have to go higher, or there has to be a rollback on excise duty. Nischal Maheshwari, whom would you like to represent first? Nischal Maheshwari, the consumer, or Nischal Maheshwari, the head of research? Because when it comes to fuel, both will have different views.
Morning, Nikunj. You have caught me at the wrong end, basically.
No, the easy answer would have been you would say that I'll start taking a bus to work.
As a consumer.
No, Nischal, you could come back and say, look, I'll play safe and I'll start taking a metro, a bus to a Uber to work.
Yeah, I hope basically we had better public transport. You would have actually taken that. But I do agree with you. I think at these prices it will start hurting the consumer. But as you know, basically high oil prices are an Achilles heel for the country. So I do. It's a double whammy basically for the government. So it's hurting the consumer, and if they cut the excise duties, basically it's going to hurt the economy. So I think government has to take this hard pill at some point of time. Let's see how it pans out.
Yeah, in fact, on that note, can we just quickly go across to the oil minister and see what he's saying? 3 minutes to go before we. Okay, we'll go to him in just a moment. But Nischal, that's one part of the story which the market is focused on, which is oil. What about the good part of the market? We've seen a slew of NBFC earnings continue to impress the street. While there might be a big issue with the banking sector, especially PSU banks and some of the corporate lenders, NBFCs are giving us a sense that business is good and business is as usual.
Yes, I think NBFC has really done well basically, and that's what my thesis has been basically, that the PSUs are going to continuously vacate the market. And given that we do not have a lot of private sector banks, I think that market will be taken care by the NBFCs, and they are doing it rightly. So you are seeing almost a 25-30% kind of a growth in most of them, except for yesterday's Manappuram results is a bit disappointing basically, where I saw only a gold loan of around 2.5 or 3% kind of a growth. But I think every other space seems to be doing pretty well.
2.5 minutes to go, about 2 minutes to go, and then we'll get the first rates. And as we walk into trade this morning, what do we have to deal with? Well, the impact of Karnataka election, at least in my book, is going to be neutral. China and US, the trade war fear for the moment has got reduced and it has got diluted. And frankly, you got to give full marks to the Republican administration, because they were able to arm twist, or they were able to negotiate a better deal. It was China who came running back, and it was Americans who are really having a laugh, which are centered around the new round of trade negotiations. Third, sell-off in pharma. What explains that mighty sell-off in pharma on Friday? Was it only strides or something else? We'll discuss that. And then looks like Ultratech shareholders have got a great deal, and Century Textile shareholders have not got a good deal, because the valuation at which the business would be transferred is actually much lower than the current enterprise value of Ultratech Cement. So I expect Ultratech to go higher, Century Textiles to go lower. And that's the way it is, and that's what we need to prepare our viewers to when it comes to today's price action.
Right, Sandeep, if you were to just scan the market, in Friday's session there was all that talk about HUL surpassing ITC in becoming the most valued consumer company in the country. How much does the HUL ITC comparison still hold? Because we're talking about different brands and different business models.
No, actually the comparison is not there except for the size of the companies, because HUL has a business model which has sustained, where their brands have done well and they have been actually gaining market share despite having such huge market share in many of the categories. ITC on the other hand has a segment cigarettes, which is a huge cash cow, but that cash cow is a decline. The FMCG business has not been made profitable still to any great extent, and the rest of the businesses could actually be coming back, like hotels could come back and all, but that contribution to profits is very limited. So the comparison is wrong, but the valuation differential is so huge now that ITC trades, I guess, at half the valuations of HUL.
Okay, the pre-open rates come in, and very quickly need to mark some of the earnings, some of the deal closures and immediate reactions coming through into the market. I think it'll be a flat open, seeming like a down open actually. But these are the pre-open rates, so we'll have to wait and watch out for how the actual opening pans out. But suffice to say, I think the markets will be a bit jittery, if at all, from the political overhang we were handed with over the weekend. I think that could keep the markets on tender hooks, or maybe not. Maybe the market would actually recover ground after a weak start. So it remains to be seen, circling around 10,500. But what catches my attention is the currency opening at 68. Yes, the dollar index has been gaining traction. Yes, the US Treasury yields have been rising. So this is not just the rupee's weakness versus the greenback. It's basically a dollar index strength, and that's extended out to emerging market currencies as well. However, I think the fall in the Indian rupee compared to our Asian peers has been a bit more significant this time around. So, be mindful. A lot of market participants would say that even at 68, we are still not close to fair value zone. They would still call the currency overvalued. They would still call for a 70 level on the rupee versus the dollar. But yes, great news for exporters, but really bad news at a time when oil prices are at $80.
So Tanvir, I was looking at some data in the morning, and the Citi report says that for the week gone by, this was the worst week for emerging market currencies after the US presidential election. So we must recognize that there is pressure in emerging market currencies. I'm surprised why, because if crude is going higher, then currencies like the Russian ruble and the Brazilian currency, they actually should appreciate. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. But there is an adjustment which is happening. The difference between crude when it was at $80 last time versus right now is the positioning of the dollar index. And Siddharth's been talking about it on a daily basis. It's the dollar index which we really need to be mindful of. As of now, no one's blinking an eyelid. But strength in dollar is bad news for emerging markets. That's a very basic, fundamental thumb rule which we follow, right, Sandeep? It's like 2 plus 2 is 4. It's a very first step you learn when you learn maths. So the first rule of really trade orientation is that weakness in the dollar index is good news for currency emerging markets, and strength in dollar index is bad news for emerging markets.
Yeah, that's true, and those correlations have got built over decades. Now what happens is that if that correlation doesn't hold for a very few number of days, people start believing that that correlation is broken, just forget that was something old and something new is going to come up. Nothing new comes up in economics in general most of the times. So, so I think those correlations are right. As of now, if you look at the Indian market, although it's become so narrow, like it's just 5-7 stocks which are driving the market up on the upside. Rest of the market is in doldrums, like down 20 to 40% in many cases. So I think the headlines are actually hiding a lot of things which are happening.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Nischal, you think we are bracing ourselves for a bit of a correction if the dollar index continues to show strength at a time when the US Treasury yields have also been edging higher?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, this year is going to be volatile. This is what we have been maintaining, and obviously the global factors are now becoming much more powerful than the domestic ones, and we have seen dollar strengthening, and all emerging market currencies actually have come off. And yesterday, the 10-year yields in the US went up to 3.1. And it looks like that they are still set for 3 to 4 rate hikes in the current year. So I think more and more countries, basically we've seen Indonesia actually increasing the rates voluntarily, the interest rates, and I believe that's going to happen in India also soon. So in this kind of a scenario, basically I see that the stock market would be volatile and maybe headed for a correction.
The other important talking point today has to be the NCLT beneficiaries. Finally, a large NCLT deal has been done, and that's Bhushan has gone to the Tatas, and this is a large deal which surely will have implications for PSU banks and other corporate banks who've been waiting for this so-called turn in the economy and turn of assets which could recover back. So Sandeep, Finally, there is some good news for PSU banks. Good news for PSU banks is a phrase which I've forgotten how to really spell out, but I guess I'm saying it after a year almost now.
Yeah, so I think it's a very positive deal closing, especially because a lot of the value has been realized. Now, unfortunate part is that in most of the rest of the cases, the recoverable amount is will not be so great, especially the infra companies which are going into liquidation. So I think that is a small
but the
issue.
bullshit money gets back into the balance.
Yeah, so the overall process is working, and that is positive.
Have you done some numbers, Nischal? Which bank will gain how much because of NCLT? What will be the impact of that on individual balance sheets? Will there be a case of bad loans becoming good loans, and will that shore up the book values for some of the lenders?
Nikunj, at the face of it, I don't think so there's going to be any write-backs basically, because if you really look at it, it's around most of the banks have provided for around 50 to 60%, and that is what I think the deal has gone through. I don't think there's going to be big write-backs basically coming through. It was not an asset which was going in for liquidation or something basically. There would have been buyers, and I think they have just got the fair value. So I don't think there is going to be big write-backs basically for the bank. But I think some of the banks which have been exposure to steel are obviously the major PSUs and ICICI and Axis, all of them have exposure to these kind of assets. But the only good thing, as Sandeep was saying, basically the NCLT process seems to be working at the moment.
Let's discuss some more stocks, but from future segment, and we are talking about big fall in pharma, but then one stock in pharma sector, and I don't know whether there should be an exact comparison or not, Biocon, and it has an inverse correlation. When pharma stocks go down, Biocon has been doing well. Well, this inverse correlation is from medium term perspective though. 8% rise in open interest with rise in prices, clearly suggesting that this is formation of long positions. If you look at volumes in both the segments, whether cash and futures, both were substantially high, clearly suggesting that this is buying which is taking place. And also there's a resistance around 660. The way built up is happening, the way stock price is moving, it seems that it might get challenged. So that's one stock to watch out for. The other name is from IT space, Tech Mahindra. Now we all focus more on TCS and Infosys, and these stocks, no doubt they are doing well, but it is Tech Mahindra which has done really well. If you look at the statistics, then yes, there is 3% rise with rise in prices, but throughout May series we are seeing accumulation of open interest, clearly suggesting that these are longs which are building up. And again, needless to mention that volumes are substantially high both in cash and futures, suggesting that this is more of buying which is taking place. So this was this were a few stocks from future segment, but let's understand that what our experts are talking when it comes to index. So first, Dr. Narayan, he's suggesting to sell Nifty, and his target is around 10,550. That's not much, and with a stop loss of 10,630 seems to be an intraday trade. And let's understand what Manas is suggesting at this point of time. He has been more of bearish, and now today we are seeing consensus. He too is suggesting to short Nifty, slightly aggressive target price 10,470 and stop loss of 10,670. This again seemed to be more of an intraday or probably 1 or 2 days call from index perspective.
Okay. As we walk into trade this morning, let me also remind everyone who's a cricket fan that Mumbai Indians lost last night.
Yeah, everybody's talking about that.
Yes, let's not lose sight of what's happening outside markets, outside politics. Cricket matches are also keeping at least me and my son occupied these week nights.
But why that happiness on your expression when you're saying Mumbai Indians has lost?
For a change, I was not supporting Mumbai Indians. I was supporting Chennai Super Kings. I mean, that's just a personal view. I live in Mumbai.
That's because your son likes Chennai Super King and he supports.
That's right.
I like Chennai Super Kings because of MS Dhoni.
No, it just, everyone has opinion to support which team do they like. So, Sandeep Subramanian, you watch cricket, you don't watch cricket?
No, not after IPL started.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, a lot of people would concur. But coming back, I think we have about 10 minutes to go before we hit the actual open. And Nischal, in-house, through the earnings, any changes that you've made on your conviction calls in the numbers that have been reported thus far?
Yeah,
So I think one of the sectors which we have been fairly disappointed is the building products. There was a lot of hope basically that the GST, once it is implemented, is going to see this movement from unorganized to organized, and we are going to see good volumes coming in. But I think the initial signs have not been very encouraging, and there has been huge cuts in the earnings basically, both on the tiles manufacturers, and we've seen the price correcting, the plywood manufacturers price correcting. So I think everywhere basically I think the building product seems to be under pressure. So besides that, I think more or less the earnings seems to be okay.
4 minutes to go, and I want to go back to that sell-off in pharma. Nischal, I haven't got your thoughts on that mighty sell-off in pharma. Do you think the selling in pharma is now slightly overdone? Strides came out with bad numbers, but that does not mean that everything in pharma should be getting smoked. I mean, the reaction on Friday was that just because Strides, which is not like the biggest player in US generic market, came out with a good set of numbers, any company which has got, anything which has got to do with pharma directly or indirectly was on the butcher block. Do you think the Friday sell-off in pharma could be an indication of a capitulation, and typically capitulation and Nischal always mark the market bottom?
To be frank, Nikunj, I don't see really hope at the end of tunnel basically for pharma. My views have been very strong about pharma sector for a long period of time, and I do not see a reverse in that. So I will tell you there are two things. One is obviously the US generic market, and there is a consolidation at the end of the US where there is earlier used to be 7-8 players, now there are only 3 players out there, and they are squeezing everybody out in the purchases. So you are seeing this kind of a margin squeeze basically. That is one thing to do with the business. The second thing is the regulatory, and that's a very big challenge. I do not see light at the end of tunnel as far as regulatory is concerned. 3 years now for Sun Pharma, they couldn't get a plant cleared. Dr. Reddy, you name the top guys, basically they have not been able to get it right. So I do not understand basically what they will get, what they have to do to get this thing right. So, and that's where you are finding, and that's where I believe everybody seems to be throwing up its hand, and sort of capitulation is happening. But again, the earnings have been cut very, very dramatically by everybody. So the stock doesn't seem to be cheap at these prices also.
2 minutes to go, Tanveer.
Yeah, I mean, let's prepare our viewers for that. You have the top 5 factors to watch, which I want to flag off once again for the benefit of our viewers. Remember, stepping into trade this morning, it's really going to be a lot of election talk, and whether or not a bit of an overhang from Friday's session will spill over into the markets, given what transpired in the floor of the Karnataka Assembly on Saturday. Pretty much on expected lines. BJP was not able to prove majority, and it seems like Mr. Kumaraswamy will be taken in as the new CM, is to be made the new CM. In fact, you have US-China trade war concerns easing, which could be a bit of a factor that could trigger the markets to be stable and cap the downside risk. In terms of the big talking points today, pharma since Strides' big miss, and I think that's just bringing about a fair amount of negativity for the pharma sector once again. Lots of concerns and question marks being raised about the potential of the business and whether it can hold ground in challenging times. In good earnings, Ashok Leyland came out with a great set of numbers, so be mindful of Ashok Leyland in the session. Ultratech to buy Century's cement business. It's come to Ultratech at a discount, so plus for Ultratech's shareholders, but not so much of a plus for Century's shareholders, because the deal has happened advantage Ultratech. And then of course Indostar to list on the bourses today. It's a small listing from the NBFC space. We have to see how much the market takes to it, because the NBFC basket per se is drawing a lot of interest.
40 seconds to go. On top of everyone's radar would be Ultratech and Century. Then it would be pharma selectively, DMart, SRF, some more stocks which would be newsmakers, Bhushan Steel and Tata Steel. Let's see how those stocks move today. So it's a news heavy morning. We don't have any large numbers which are going to be market moving in nature today. but in the middle of earnings season and looking at how markets are reacting to earnings, I guess individual stocks will continue to move. First rates Monday morning, a brand new week on your screen, and the first rates this Monday morning are, it's an uptick of 20 points for the Nifty, it's an uptick of 3.5 rupees for ICICI Bank, HPCL is at 314. Bear in mind that fuel prices are going up slowly, gradually, but they're going up on a daily basis. And then you got ONGC and Grasim. I want to look at Ultra Tech. It has to be a gap up start for Ultratech. The first rates I expect will be strong. For Century Textile, I don't expect the first rates will be strong. And I want to quickly mark JP Associates because they came out with numbers over the weekend. It's still a net loss. Net loss may have come down, but there is still a yes and no as to what will happen to JP Infratech. Until the time that JP Infratech deal is not resolved, I think there is a challenge for JP Associates. But on expected lines, I guess, Tanveer, Century Textiles is getting smoked.
Oh yes, indeed. I also want to just bring up some more stocks in focus this morning. Remember, Ashok Leyland came out with a decent set of numbers, so we should bring up Ashok Leyland in this session. I mean, yes, Securities is going to be the talking point, but it's really some of these big names on the back of earnings that we need to keep our eyes on. So Ashok Leyland is one of them. We had on the back of Indostar some activity in the NBFC space, so be mindful of the moves there. I also want to very quickly touch upon some of the other key movers in the session today. Thermax is a business to focus on in the session on the back of earnings. But some of the high flyers in trade clearly include the likes of an ICICI Bank and Axis Bank on the index. Want to mark Cipla as well. And an ONGC. These are some of the high flyers at the start of the session. I don't know how much can the trade sustain there because it's a brush of red on the screen across the board, but we'll have to see. IT also comes up for you on your screens. Most of the IT majors seem to have had a bit of a positive start in trade, but again, whether or not it's sustainable, we'll have to wait and watch out for that. Bharti Infratel, Tata Steel, Hindalco, commodities are finding favor in the market. There's Titan, which is holding out, Coal India. What's interesting is that I don't see a directional play in terms of a particular sector finding interest. Just want to revisit Pharma, Sun Pharma, Dr. Reddy's, Cipla, all of these names are under pressure in Friday's trading session. And even today, the cuts may not be deep, but you are seeing across the board pain in Pharma. Some unwinding pressure coming in there. From the broader markets too, as we look at some of the top movers. There's the likes of Bank of India, Canara Bank. So banks per se are drawing interest. Godrej Consumers is holding at about 0.5%. Power Grid, GSK Consumers, Titan. Again, it's really some of the large caps which are drawing interest even among the top mid-cap names.
In fact, Tanveer, PSU banks, and I'm just trying to connect what Nikun said, that some of the banks might be getting benefit of this Bhushan Steel going through the NCLT and the deal done, and it's gone to Tata Steel. Maybe, I'm not sure, the impact of that on some of the PSU banks, Bank of India, PNB. I don't see any reason why these stocks should have gone up today. So that might be the reason. And on face of it, it seems that Bank Nifty is outperforming. So you have ICICI Bank, as you mentioned, is also doing well. One of the large cap stock, and we need to mention this, is TCS. That stock is up by 1%. We are also seeing other names from same group. Tata Steel is also up by 1%, and IndusInd Bank is also contributing on the upside along with ONGC. But what's not doing well today is auto space, and if you look at Ashok Leyland, though one would be impressed with numbers, that stock is down by 2.5%. We are also seeing Maruti, which is a sell call from Manas, and that stock after 22nd December 2016 first time closed below 200 DMA. That stock is under pressure. And related space, Shriram Transport Finance, that stock is also down by 1.5%. TVS Motor is under pressure. Bajaj Auto is down by 1.5%. So it is banking which is pulling market higher. Auto, though may not have significant weightage, is pulling market down. Dr. Nayan, how are you reading this opening? SGX Nifty was suggesting flat start. It is flat, but the bias is negative.
Yeah, the bias is clearly negative because if you look at, let's say, the future space, you will find that the breadth has actually turned a little worse post the opening. Even at the open, we had almost 2:1 sort of reading. So now you got about 130 stocks versus about 65 or 69 stocks on the gainer side. And what is more is that the total number of stocks which are losing more, that is 2-3% or plus is certainly greater for the negatives. So clearly the market is biased to the downside. You also can see it from the fact that the main newsmaker for the day, Ultratech Century. When the market opened, Century was about 7.5% negative and Ultratech was just 2% positive. So that itself gives you an idea that the bias of the market is to the downside, and hence day traders need to be looking for some shorting candidates during the day, because there doesn't seem to be any specific news flow which can change or alter the course of the market during the day. So it might be flat to maybe downward. I think that should be the scenario. Stock wise, I would look at shorting Jet Airways. Even now continues to remain weak. I would short into a Star that still remains weak. It's in spite of all that noise of Friday, it's another 2.5% down. BML is something which is down and could be shorted, and India Bull Housing is facing some bit of flag, so that is another thing which could be shorted.
But remember, it is up to 240, which means that there's a ceiling to the upper price. But if the stock comes down even to 180, 190, there is no compulsion for them to buy. Thought of a buyback will keep the stock warm, but will that act as a trigger for the market stock to go higher? Maybe not. Will that act as a back support eventually if promoters they start buying and increasing immediately? The answer really could be yes. But India Bull Group companies of late have come under pressure. India Bull Housing Ventures or India Bull Housing Finance are down today by 10-11 rupees. India Bull Ventures, after that epic run from 20 to 500, has come down from 500 to levels of almost 450. And then Sorel Infra also has seen couple of down circuits in a row. Let me now bring on both Harsha Upadhyay. He's with Kotak AMC. Harsha, good morning. Thank you for joining us. There is visible pain in the small and the mid cap stock.